Battle of Midway. Fought near the central Pacific island of Midway, it is considered the most decisive battle of the war in the Pacific. Before this battle, the Japanese were on the offensive, capturing territory throughout Asia and the Pacific. By their attack, the Japanese had planned to capture Midway to use as an advance base, as well as entrap and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Because communication intelligence successes, the U.S. Pacific Fleet surprised the Japanese forces, sinking the 4 Japanese carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor only 6 months before, while only losing 1 carrier. After Midway, the Americans and their allies took the offensive in the Pacific. Midway was a very decisive naval battle of World War II, with the Americans deciding the outcome, won by the Americans and in turn giving them ground in the Pacific. This was a very important battle since the Americans were struggling in the Pacific before this, but soon after this, the momentum and favor transferred from the Axis to the Allied powers, and the war was in America's favor. The Battle of the Philippine Sea took place between June 19th and June 20th, 1944. It was said to be the last great carrier battle of World War II. The Battle of Midway in 1942 had done a great deal of damage to Japan's carrier force. But even into 1944, however, Japan statistically had a greater carrier force than America. Despite America's huge military capability, the Japanese Navy still represented a great threat to her, especially in America's desire to advance to the Marianas. With the Philippine Sea battle being of high importance just like Midway, Americans fought hard for a pivotal outcome. This battle was also very large, dangerous, and deadly, but deciding in a very large way for Americans. Our Navy took out substantial numbers of aircraft and sea vessels of the Japanese while only losing a few of our own and keeping every single ship afloat. This strengthened the Americans' position in the surrounding islands of Japan as well, allowing the Americans to remain in control of important islands. With Hitler's forces withering in Europe, America now directed their focus to the Pacific. They soon began their campaign to push back the heavily expanded Japanese Empire. However, the fight would be far more difficult and exacting than anyone had predicted. Due to the nature of an using campaign, which would take the American forces through hundreds of tiny islands, it forced the fighting into 2 major fronts. The first front being the many islands now encompassed and controlled by the Japanese defenses, and the second, the seas, by the Japanese naval fleets. One of the goals of the U.S. Pacific invasion was to force the Japanese to return to the imperialized land which they had unrightfully and unjustly claimed as a part of the Japanese Empire. Another was to avenge the fallen brethren during the attack on Pearl Harbor. They ultimately planned to launch a landing onto mainland Japan. However, first they needed to go through the Solomon Island defenses. In order to achieve this, the U.S. devised a system which in theory would help them to liberate and take over these islands as quickly as possible. This tactic became known as island hopping. By using this technique, the U.S. military avoided unnecessary casualties and the use of supplies which would be greatly needed for upcoming events. The very first Pacific invasion took place at the Battle of Savo Sound. The Japanese had taken control of the 2 neighboring islands of Guadalcanal and Savo. The first American landing fleet landed on the beaches of Guadalcanal with very little resistance. However, it could not be said for landing on the island of the much smaller Savo Island. All in all, it cost nearly 800 lives and 2,000 total casualties to take control of Savo Sound. This bitter struggle would set the tone for the rest of the Pacific campaign. It would take more than just superior manpower and technology to win out this war. Through the use of their newly developed tactics and sheer persistence, the U.S. forces slowly pushed their way towards Japan, becoming more and more of a threat every step they made. On captured islands, they were able to take advantage of airstrips that had been implemented by the Japanese. From these islands, they were able to launch more organized air raids with an even greater number of planes to bomb Japanese cities. These bombings kept the Japanese people in constant fear. Eventually, the U.S. found themselves at the doorstep of mainland Japan. The battles which took place at Iwo Jima and Okinawa are some of the most infamous in history. However, the unbelievable determination that the American soldiers displayed here will not. The struggles to control Iwo Jima and Okinawa accounted for more than half of the total casualties in the entire Pacific War. Despite having faced 2 days of steady shelling from American destroyers, the heavily entrenched Japanese also displayed an incredible show of determination and tenacity. Finally, the hellfire came to an end. With the fall of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, General MacArthur and his forces staged an invasion from mainland Japan. President Truman, however, had different plans. His order to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought a highly controversial end to the war.